এজন্য স্যার আমরা লাইভে আছি, এখন শুরু করুন।
আচ্ছা, আমি শুরু করি।
স্টার্ট।
আমাকে শোনা যাচ্ছে, দেখা যাচ্ছে দুটোই তো?
হ্যাঁ স্যার, হ্যাঁ স্যার, বহুত।
আচ্ছা, ঠিক আছে, তাহলে আমি শুরু করছি। গুড আফটারনুন, respected principal sir, Dr. Shukriti Ghoshal, respected speakers and resource persons of this afternoon, Professor Bihar Shaha and Dr. Vilina Banerjee, respected professors and colleagues from other various colleges and universities, other audiences, my colleagues of my college, and my very dear students. I extend a warm welcome to all of you in today's international webinar. Today's webinar is I think it is the second in line after the initial webinar that was hosted by our Women's Studies Cell. Today's webinar is on a very current economic aspect. We shall be talking about, or we shall be hearing about, Indian economic policy and populism. We are extremely honored that we have two very distinguished faculties from two reputed institutions around the globe. We have with us Dr. Vilina Banerjee, who's working with assistant professor with Jadavpur University, and we also have Professor Bihar Shaha, who's working with Durham University, UK. And it's really our honor that these two resource persons are gracing this occasion. So first and foremost, I would like to apologize for the initial delay because there was a technical snag on our part, and this is a limitation of having webinar. We have to depend on external factors which are beyond our control. However, hope things will be all right from now onwards. May I now request our respected principal sir, Dr. Shukriti Ghoshal, to kindly deliver the welcome address. Sir. মলয়বাবু স্যারকে এবার প্রেজেন্টেশনের রোলটা একটু দিয়ে দিন।
Morning to Professor, who is a friend of mine, and good afternoon to all Indian participants. I, at the very beginning of the webinar, extend my heart to Professor Shaha and Professor Banerjee, Vilina Banerjee, who have been kind enough to accept our invitation and enlighten the participants on a very important, relevant topic on which today's webinar has been organized by the Department of Economics, MUC College. Now, not a man of economics, therefore I am not the right person to say anything valuable on this topic on which the webinar has been organized. But from my layman's knowledge on the from a reading of the topic, Indian economic policy and populism, what I have gathered, as we all know, that populism is a term which has a pejorative nuance. It is something like the politician into the gallery, and it comes under what we call appeasement politics. So you disregard the economic context and you prioritize the people's benefit to people's benefit, not far-reaching outcome, but something that might ultimately derail the economy of a country. Now, we may, for example, refer to Donald Trump's decision of banning outsourcing in America. So economists and politicians, they belong to two. They have the foresight to see the far-reaching effect of a particular economic policy adopted by the government, and politicians, they always prefer pragmatism. Now, pragmatism or ad hocism might ultimately the economy of a country in the long run, but the economists always try to strengthen the economy of the country so that the economic benefits ultimately, all the people come and become beneficiary of the policies adopted by the government. As the politicians, they are the real policy makers. They adopt pragmatic approach prefer to adopt it, and ultimately affects or tells on the health of a country's economy. Strong resistance to the think tank can make politicians go slow on this populist route. I think that the seminar has the webinar, I'm sorry, in this particular issue that it might create a kind of, the outcome of the seminar would be to create a kind of pressure group, and it will make the politicians, if they are so willing, to change their policy. And I gratitude on behalf of my institution and on behalf of the faculty members and the other members of the college. I extend my gratitude to Professor Vibhas Saha and also Professor Rilina Banerjee, who have already running late. I don't want to take much of your time. So I wish the seminar all success, and I think that the seminar will be webinar will be successful in creating the kind of human resources that we expect from the theoreticians, the academicians. One advantage of pandemic situation, we all are locked down virtually, and one advantage of this that we can hear people who are far apart from the place, the organizing institution, but they can nevertheless enrich every moment with their ideas and with their thoughts. So I wish the seminar all success, and thank also the participants who have made the webinar very meaningful. Without participation, that would be meaningful at all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for your encouraging words. Now, I would now request Professor Rilina Boshu Banerjee to kindly deliberate. She'll be talking about economic policy. Professor Banerjee has pursued her PhD from Jadavpur University. The major research areas on which she works are financial structure, financial innovation, open economy, macroeconomics, asset pricing, to name a few. She was erstwhile engaged with St. Xavier's College, Autonomous, Kolkata, the very reputed institution, and thereafter she served Rabindra Bharati University, and now currently she is working as assistant professor with Jadavpur University. She was also the visiting faculty at Calcutta University as well as St. Xavier's College. She has some excellent publications in Foreign Trade Review, Trade and Development Review, Journal of Review, Pakistan Development Review, Journal of Research in Economics and International Finance, Macroeconomics and Finance in Emerging Market Economies, and Journal of Economic Integration, to name just a few. So thank you so much, madam. Now I would request Professor Banerjee to kindly enlighten us. মলয় বাবু প্রফেসর ব্যানার্জিকে এবার পার্টিসিপেশনের ইয়েটা দিন, শেয়ার পার্টিসিপেশন করে দিন।
Well, first of all, I would like to thank the organizers to inviting me as well to share the platform with somebody as reputed as Professor Saha. It's not often that young professors like myself get a chance to deliberate on issues like this. So let me just move on to today's topic. Is my slide visible? Hello?
Nah, it's not visible as of now.
Okay, just one. Something went wrong. Just
মলয় বাবু আপনি আছেন তো?
হ্যাঁ ম্যাম, আমি আছি ম্যাম।
Is it okay now?
একটু দেখিয়ে দিন রিজনা ম্যাডাম।
Is this okay? I've started sharing.
হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ দেখা যাচ্ছে, হ্যাঁ বলো।
Yes ma'am, please continue.
Okay. Now, currently, the Indian economy, along with the global counterpart, has gone for a toss following this unprecedented pandemic situation. Now, following this, India and all other countries have come out with some sort of rescue strategies to move out of this deadlock position. However, this is a very unique situation where the policymakers are responding to crisis situation and trying to overcome it somehow. But this is not the normal case, or quote unquote, this is not the old normal. Uh, the macro policy makers often design policies as well to suit the ever-changing need of the nation. So today I will be talking on the policy reform and development experience of the Indian economy since 2000. Now, I would just look into the roadmap which India followed post 2000 and leave the more analytical part and the political ideology part to Professor Shaha, who's more experienced in talking about these kind of things. Well, 30 minutes is quite a small time to talk about 2 decades of policy, so I'll just touch upon the major changes which took place in the policy paradigm of India between 2000 and 2020. Now, to look into the background, Indian economy has always been a very interesting case study given its colonial history. At independence, the country was hopelessly poor as a result of steady deindustrialization by Britain. Now, the two main features of colonialism in India was subordination and surplus appropriation. So ultimately, India became a mere agrarian appendix and a subservient trading partner of Britain. Since then, following the 5-year plans and focusing on a mixed economy type structure, Indian economy evolved slowly, only to be set back by the 1990s balance of payment crisis. However, once again, with adequate structural policies and stabilization programs, the economy thrived back. And in fact, a 2-digit growth figure was projected around 2010. If we look into the data for some major macroeconomic indicators, just before that, this period of 20 years is best studied if we compartmentalize it into 2 periods. One is before the great financial crisis and the other is after the financial crisis. That is 2000 to 2008 and then 2008 onwards. So if we look into the first period, that is from 2000 to 2008, and if we look into the major macroeconomic indicators, we find that 2003-4 to 2007-8 boasts of the best average possible with regard to economic growth, inflation, current account deficit, investment, and all other scenarios. So given such kind of a booming scenario, what were the policy challenges which the economists or which the policy planners were facing? Now, this period started with massive fiscal deficits at the central and the state level, and it ended with an inflationary spurt which was induced by unforeseen global commodity price shock. In between, the major challenge was a sustained surge in foreign capital inflows after 2002-3, which continued. And there was also an unprecedented acceleration in overall economic growth. Uh, just to look into the central structure at that point of time, in fact, for all this 20 years, there were 3 different rules in the center. First was the NDA till 2004, May 2004. Then we had UPA 1 and UPA 2, followed by, once again, NDA from 2014. Now, as I said, given this situation, the 2 main things on which the planners focused on was firstly, fiscal consolidation, given that there were so huge fiscal deficits. And the second was management of external capital flows, given that there was a huge surge in foreign capital inflows. Now, to move into the first aspect, that is why fiscal consolidation, it was seen that in 2001 and 2, at the central and the state level, the combined fiscal and revenue deficits were as high as 9.9% and 7% of GDP. This made the center and the state sit back and review what was going on. So both of them understood the gravity of the fiscal imbalance situation and they began to take effective action. So what were the things that they undertook in this regard? The first thing is the Fiscal Responsibility and Budgetary Management Act of 2003. What was this aimed at? This was basically aimed at lowering the fiscal and the revenue deficits of the center and state by March 2009. Every year there were some targets, and once it was fulfilled, they moved on to the next year, and once again the target was supposed to be fulfilled. The central government had also decided not to provide guarantees in excess of 0.5% of the GDP in any financial year. Another thing which the states focused on a lot or National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, which was later renamed as Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act. Now, what was this targeted towards? This was targeted towards provision of social protection for the most vulnerable people living in rural India by providing employment opportunities to them. What kind of employment opportunities? Because as we know, these people are not quote unquote the kind of skilled workers that we expect in the service sector. So these people, they were actually provided with 100 days of paid employment uh, to adult members of any household who were willing to do unskilled manual work related to public work at the statutory minimum wage of 120 rupees per day in 2009 prices. So the idea was to dole out some kind of money towards the less privileged such that their purchasing power increases or improves too. Along with that, there was also the Indira Awas Yojana, which was to provide grant for the construction of houses to the lesser privileged once again. There was the Shorno Jointri Gram Swarojgar Yojana, which was a modification of the IRDP or the Integrated Rural Development Program, which was targeted towards the women and children in rural area, training of the rural youth for self-employment, giving toolkits to the rural artisans and similar things. There was also the National Rural Health Mission and the National Health Mission, which was set towards improvement of the availability and access to health quality of health care by the people who were residing in the rural areas, the poor, the women, and likewise. So this was one set of expenditure which was which the government was entering into in this particular phase. Now, if we once again look into the data, what we find that there has been a significant increase in the tax GDP ratio from 5.9% in 2001 to 9.2% in 2007-8. So that is quite a large improvement in the tax collection. Now, why did it happen? First of all, this a major part of this came from the personal income tax as well as the corporate income tax. Particularly, the corporate income tax increased from 37% to 57%, the collection of corporate tax, I'm sorry. What led to the collection of these kind of taxes? Now, there were four major factors at work. The first was the remarkable growth in the central tax revenues. The second was the recommendations of the 12th Finance Commission, which the states were also following. The third were, once again, the fiscal responsibility, which the center also pushed onto the state. And the fourth one was, once again, a very important strategy, which was the introduction of VAT in India. What was the VAT? The VAT, or the value-added tax, was a multi-stage tax that was imposed at various stages of purchase and sale of goods and services. So that means at different level of purchase, the tax was being imposed. So this reduced the chances of tax evasion and made the whole system more transparent and uniform. So this was a major landmark in the tax reforms at the state level. How far it, was successful and all this, to some extent, is being seen from the data, which shows a quite high ratio of tax to GDP ratio. Now, the second issue, as I said, was that of capital inflows, sustained capital inflows. Now, again, if you look at the data, see from 2002-3 to 2007-8, the net capital inflows increased 10 folds. That is from 10.8 to $108 billion, which is a massive increase. Now, the RBI, the then RBI governor, Reddy, he's warned that this extraordinary spurt in capital inflows posed major challenges. Why? For management of exchange rate, capital controls, monetary policy, as well as inflation. Now, the usual textbook prescription would be to let the exchange rate appreciate. If foreign currency is coming in, then that means your currency is becoming stronger. So let the exchange rate appreciate. Now, this recommendation also draws strength from the open economic macroeconomic theory of the impossible trinity, which disallows simultaneous achievement of exchange rate stability, monetary independence, and capital market integration. But one thing to be noted here is that for an intermediate exchange regime like India's, where there is partial capital control, countries can actually enjoy substantial monetary independence along with some degree of autonomy over the exchange rate. Now, the RBI and the government opted for something similar, though the task was a little bit difficult because the scale and longevity of the capital surge was quite large. So the RBI also underwent the sterilization procedure, and what happened was they had to undertake issuance of fresh bonds under the market stabilization scheme. At the same time, the RBI backed this MSS operations by short-term liquidity management through liquidity adjustment facility, changes in CRR, and similar. So the objective was that even if foreign capital was coming in and there was a rise in the foreign exchange reserves, it should not lead to inflationary situation or letting the monetary policy go haywire in the Indian economic context. At the same time, the government was also reducing the anti-export bias and was undertaking schemes which were to promote exports. That is when came the structural break, which was the 2008 crisis. What happened here, most of us already know. There was the burst of the housing estate bubble, which led to a major setback in the investment banks along with the insurance sector, which percolated and transgressed boundaries to move into all the countries. So India by itself, though was resilient to the crisis directly, it had to face the problems of a worldwide recession. It faced the problem of a severe capital flight. Am I audible? Hello? Am I audible?
Yes, yes, ma'am. Continue. Please continue.
Okay. And there was also monetary lag system. Now, another thing to note here is that in 2007-8, the government had issued oil bonds and fertilizer bonds to government-owned oil marketing companies and the fertilizer companies in lieu of the subsidies which were given to keep the prices artificially low. Now, when this 2008 crisis happened, and just before that, the international prices of oil, fertilizer, and food continued to rise. That meant that initially, which was around 0.7% of the GDP, which was being invested in oil bonds and fertilizer bonds, increased substantially. So now the government faced a very strange situation where, on one hand, it had to curtail the unnecessary expenditures which it was making to control the fiscal position. On the other hand, it had to keep the demand in the economy high. It had to manage the credit crunch which was coming because of the banks being skeptical of the worldwide situation. So the economy had to be kept running while injecting liquidity into the system. and at the same time while promoting or encouraging demand in the economy by undertaking fiscal and monetary policies. So on one hand, in terms of the monetary policy, while RBI reduced the CRR and SLR, reduced the repo rate lending rate, on the other hand, the government undertook expansionary fiscal policies like the Sixth Pay Commission, interest cost subsidies, investments in infrastructural expenditure, tax cuts, and to maintain the foreign sector, the RBI sold the foreign currency reserve, fortunately, which it had quite a lot of, to keep the exchange rate from depreciating or crashing. And the other thing which the government undertook was the removal of fuel subsidy and allowing the fuel prices to be linked to the market. Now, there came some sort of a paradigm shift in the thinking of the policymakers post this 2008. In fact, the agenda of inclusivity and sustainability became the focus of policy framework not only at national level but also at the international level. The new approach of development was targeted or directed towards a pro-poor growth or a broad-based growth. Now, the approach paper of the 11th five-year plan for the Government of India laid down the vision and strategies for inclusive growth. The factors which they highlighted upon were poverty reduction, employment generation, access to essential services, equality of opportunity, skill building, good governance, women empowerment, environmental protection, industrial development, and others. Now, some of the very well-known policies and reforms following these were the Jan Dhan Yojana, Swachh Bharat Mission, Bharat Nirman, Antyodaya Yojana, Ayushman Bharat, Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, and many more in these lines. Another very important change which took place once the NDA government came in was the dissolution of the Planning Commission and the inception of the Niti Aayog. Niti Aayog was basically a policy think tank which was established with the aim to achieve sustainable development goals. So the targets which were placed for the Niti Aayog were to achieve a rapid growth rate of around 9 to 10% by 2022-23, which is supposed to be quote unquote inclusive, clean, sustained, and formalized. The other thing which Niti Aayog harped upon was to leverage technology for achieving all these targets. The other targets were to include the urban poor and slum dwellers, to make the schools more inclusive by addressing the barriers related to the physical environment and curriculum, to make higher education more inclusive for the more vulnerable groups, to provide uh, health packages targeted towards everybody. So overall, there was a shift in the thinking so far. It's not that these how to manage poverty or how to eradicate poverty was not in the agenda of the previous or the erstwhile policymakers, but now the way of achieving it went some sort of a maybe a packaging in a new bottle, a packaging of old wine in new bottle, but the way it would be implemented was going to change. Now, a very important movement which was launched in this regard was the Make in India movement. Now, it was observed that while in China, the manufacturing sector contributed to 32% of overall GDP, in India, it was only 13%, 13%. On the other hand, the labor cost in India was less than half of that in China. So that means with the increasing domestic demand, the manufacturing sector held tremendous potential. This is what paved the way for the Make in India movement. So the objective was to encourage companies to manufacture their products in India and incentivize and dedicate themselves into manufacturing. So 25 economic sectors like aviation, biomedical, automobile, etc. were identified, and these sectors were expected to create 100 million additional manufacturing jobs by 2022. Another movement which went in sync with this was the Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana of 2014. This was a nationwide scheme launched by the government of India to ensure financial inclusion. So see, inclusion is coming in different ways. So the idea was to ensure that the wealth in the form of money which was there lying in the households what to be channelized into the formal banking sector such that the credit creation process could be enhanced and at the same time to include these people into the entire financial sector. So under this scheme, around 15 million bank accounts were opened, and this scheme also allowed for credit, insurance, and pension for the people who availed of this. A very important initiative which still goes on is the Digital India 2015. Uh, though right now I'm a little bit skeptical about how well my connectivity is, but the idea of the Digital India was quite strong. What was this? Once again, this targeted towards the inclusion of everybody into the digital framework. That is, providing digital infrastructure as a source of utility to every citizen, governance and services on demand again digitally, and to look after the digital empowerment of every citizen. Now, this Digital India was actually the enabler and beneficiary of other key schemes like BharatNet, Make in India, Startup India, Stand Up India. So, this was some sort of a prerequisite which would help in the efficient running of the other schemes. Now, to move into the monetary policy framework, uh, the there was an agreement between the government of India and RBI, and from which generated the Monetary Policy Committee, which would see to it that the primary target of the monetary policy would be to have a tolerable inflation rate or to attain some sort of a price stability. The inflation rate targeted would be at 4% with a standard deviation of 2. This monetary policy committee was supposed to look into this and have a transparency and accountability in fixing policies such that this target could be met with. Uh, Similar schemes were like the Pradhan Mantri Suraksha Bima Yojana and the Pradhan Mantri Jeevan Jyoti Yojana, which were also targeted towards bringing in the money lying idle in the households to the financial sector, such that is in a way to inject liquidity into the entire system. Now, moving into the financial sector reforms, one of the major pillar was to provide financial autonomy to public sector banks. And once again, the Digital India, that is use of information technology to improve the efficiency and productivity. There were introduction of the RTGS and NEFT, which would make transfer of funds much more easier. I'm sure all of you are conversant with your KYC and you have stood in lines to submit your KYC. But yes, this was also one of the major reforms which were undertaken during this period. Moving into some more, RBI did an asset quality review in 2015. Now, what was this asset quality review? Actually, they went through the balance sheet of all the public sector banks to check how well they were faring with regard to the NPAs. It was found that 12 accounts were identified which comprised about 25% of the NPAs. So following this came up the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, the Banking Regulation Ordinance. There was the Indradhanush package, which was to infuse 70,000 crore in the state-run banks such that they could meet up with the Basel III norms, which are globally given. The Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code actually laid down some maximum time period for completing the insolvency resolution procedures. In spite of all this, again, there were news of some Vijay Mallya, some Nirav Modi, and similar cases. Then came one of the very unthought of unknown of policy, which was demonetization. All of a sudden, on 8th November 2016, the government of India announced that old 500 and 1000 rupee notes would be just scrapped, and the economy faced an immediate demand and supply shock in both sides. The reasons put forward for this demonetization was of stripping the Indian economy of its black money, pushing people to pay taxes for the unaccounted pile of cash, curb terrorism, promote digital India, and make India cashless. This move was
Sorry to
a
interrupt.
different.
রিলিনাদি, হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ, এবার ঠিক আছে। হ্যাঁ, মধ্যখানে you weren't audible. Now it's okay. হ্যাঁ, please continue.
Okay, so the goods and services tax has different slabs starting from 0% to 28%, and the commodities are accordingly placed in different slabs. Now, this policy has also been criticized because this wasn't clearly explained to the people before it was imposed. But once again, data shows that to some extent, tax collection is improved post this implementation of GST. Another thing which I'm sure all of you have faced, those who are residing in India, this is the withdrawal of subsidies and direct benefit transfers with regard to the LPG cylinders. So, the again, how it executed was that the consumers would pay full market price for non-subsidized cylinders, while the government could reimburse a subsidy amount directly into their bank accounts. However, this rollout was not fully effective because the government froze the price of non-subsidized cylinders between October 2017 and July 2019. And this price was still less than what the market price was supposed to be. However, with this COVID coming in, the and the supply shock and etc., there might be the situation might improve of with respect to the government subsidies being doled out. Moving into the foreign trade policy from 2015 to 20, once again, it was based towards promoting exports, both merchandise and service. So the MES was aimed to offset the infrastructural inefficiencies and the associated costs which were involved in the export of goods and produces. A similar was done with respect to service exports. So the government was trying to build different kind of infrastructural efficiencies as well as cutting down on bureaucratic issues such that the foreign trade could be made easier and export could be boosted. The Niryat Bandhu scheme, this actually looked into identifying the potential exporters and how to mentor them to export their products. Again, some pension schemes which were related to the financial sector reforms. Now, moving into agriculture. See, once again, we come back to the digital India movement because the direct income transfers to farmers is promoted by leveraging Jan Dhan, Aadhaar, and mobile. So, if you have all these three, then you get direct income transfers to your account. Now, a very important and significant move in the agricultural sector was to provide for e-NAM. What is this? This is basically a wholesale mandi which the government is providing for the sellers, that is for the farmers to come and sell their produce to. And So they don't have to go to the market, so they don't have to follow the n number of middlemen such that the prices would increase, and some sort of a quality assurance would also be there. There are talks about this also moving into the privatization of all this. I'm not going into the details of the education reforms because all of you are in the education sector, so you know of this Rusha and this other things which have been undertaken. Reforms in the health sector included basically again accessible and cheaper and quality healthcare to majority section of the economy. Now, let me come to the present situation, which is the COVID-19 pandemic situation. Now, here there are three interlinked problems. The first is a health shock, then there is an economic shock following from the lockdown, and the third is a global economic downturn. Now, each one of these shocks are significant on their own, and put together, they have created considerable pressure upon the policymakers to act quite quickly and decisively. Now, this is not a very easy task because there has been the twin shocks of creating supply side disruptions as well as triggering reduction in aggregate demand. Uh, Additional disruptions occurred due to mass exodus of migrant workers from the urban areas, non-availability of financing, restriction of international trade, and logistics issues. Following this, initially in March, our finance minister announced free food grains and cash payments to women, poor citizens, and farmers as a part of 1.7 lakh crore Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Yojana. Eventually, in May, once again, our Prime Minister declared that India would provide 20 trillion rupees in fiscal and monetary measures to support an economy battered by this week-long lockdown to fight the novel coronavirus. So the packages were basically including of two things. On one hand, the food grains were being given to the poor and the migrants. At the same time, direct benefits were being transferred to their accounts. The medium and small scale enterprises were badly hit. So here also the rupees 3 trillion collateral free bank loans were to be given to MSMEs with 100% credit guarantee. The comprehensive economic relief package, which the government declared, was the Atmanirbhar package, which had three components: the monetary actions, which included basically this reverse repo rates being cut, the targeted long-term repo operations, the quote-unquote moratorium on loans for 3 months. Then there were the fiscal actions, where, as I said, the subsidies were being doled and food grains were being imported, and certain economic reforms were also there. Uh, so together we are still fighting this crisis, and hopefully we'll see a better tomorrow once these policies actually are being fully implemented. And the last policy which I would talk in this regard is the National Education Policy 2020, which I'm sure again has been read and discussed in quite a lot in this particular scenario. So this talks of a different system altogether, of a 5 plus 3 plus 3 plus 4 curricular structure. The curriculum going under change, the papers to be studied will be a more of a cafeteria approach. So this is in a nutshell what we have seen to be happening to the Indian economy since 2000 to 2020. Now, I have only talked about the economic backgrounds behind why these policies were initiated, or what had been discussed that these should do, so on and so forth. But what was the political ideology behind them? Were these actually targeted towards the people? Or was it actually uh, the motives of the political parties which were only being fulfilled? So that part will be left to Professor Shaha to discuss. Thank you so much once again. I hope I didn't put you onto your afternoon siesta. So with this, I finish my presentation. Thank you so much.
মলবাবু আমাকে প্রেজেন্টারের ইয়েটা দিন। মলয়বাবু লাইনে আছেন? মলয় বাবু, উজ্জ্বল বাবু কেউ?
হ্যাঁ স্যার, করে দিয়েছি।
হ্যাঁ, এবার
Q&A
আমাকে
করবেন।
আমাকে প্রেজেন্টেবিলিটি একটু দিন। আমি বলবো?
হ্যাঁ স্যার, বলুন।
Okay, so thank you so much, madam, for the wonderful deliberation. It was really difficult to bring in so many dimensions in such a constrained time frame. I would now request the audience to post their questions in the chat box. Language is not a bar. You may post your questions in English or in Bengali. We'll take a few questions and then we'll request Professor Shaha to deliberate on his presentation. But let's take some questions for the time being. Those of you who are watching this webinar in Cisco, please type it in the chat box, and those of you who are watching it on YouTube, you may also type it in the chat box in the message section. We'll get the questions and we'll ask the speakers the questions. So please type your questions. Okay, so we have one question. Rilina,
Yeah. What exactly do you mean by bank consolidation? If you could just elaborate. Bank consolidation in what sense?
I think what she means is amalgamation of banks.
Well, it depends on. See, the balance sheet of the banks are not very. What should I say? If we don't look into the off balance sheet items, then it's they are not very healthy per se. So, given that, it could actually help in improving the efficiency if the not super good performing banks are actually amalgamated with the better performing ones, and the capital could also be huddled together.
Okay, thank you so much. Shubham Shudar, he is working with, I think, Michael Madhusudan College, Purulia. He has a question for you. Do you think Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan will be able to uplift post-COVID India?
Well,
That's a
I think
tricky
we
one.
have to wait for post-COVID India because we actually don't know how long this situation will continue. So, given the uncertainty regarding the duration of this situation, it's difficult to right now say how far it will be actually helpful. But I would like to mention, if you're interested, there's a paper by Rajeshwari Shengupta. You can look into that. They look into very details of this the packages which the government has undertaken. So that could be a interesting reading if you want to.
Okay, thank you. Another question we have from Devshilpi Kuhor. She wants to ask, how do you rate the progress of Make in India program?
Nancy, I feel like a politician sitting in some sort of a talk show in this live Shumon or something like that. But see, any policy which is taken, if it is targeted towards the betterment of the economy or the society, is good. But the question is, how far can this be actually implemented and how far the benefits will actually percolate? That is where the problem lies. So I have a development package for the poor, but say what happened in Amphan, the targeted people were the people who actually lost their houses. But unfortunately, the money went to the people who had houses. So if the policies are like this, then it becomes difficult to have. But it doesn't mean that Make in India is bad. But again, how successful it will depend upon how well it can be implemented.
Implemented. Okay. Another question. Is Niti Aayog better suited than Planning Commission in boosting growth and fostering development?
uh, as I said, see the Niti Aayog and Planning Commission, it's not that they are contradictory to one another. The system has changed. It is now more of a federal system which is being placed where the states are also having their representation in the center. So again, if the motive is good and if people are actually working in sync, then it can help. So it's not that one
Okay.
is inconclusive of the other. That's not the point.
Okay. We have another related question from Jyotirmoy Chakraborty, Mr. Jyotirmoy Chakraborty. Am I audible, Rilnadi? I don't think you are
Shape.
audible. Yeah, we have another question, related question from Professor Jyotirmoy Chakraborty. He's asking how far Niti Aayog be able to replace Planning Commission. I think you have already answered it in terms of inclusiveness and employment generation, growth, and its other distinguished objectives. I think you have already answered it. You have anything more to add, Nadi? I think she got disconnected, or maybe I got disconnected. মলয়বাবু শোনা যাচ্ছে?
হ্যাঁ স্যার, you are very much audible. But really,
রিলিনা দি কোথায় ডিসকানেক্টেড হয়ে গেছেন না? হ্যাঁ, উনি আবার কানেক্টেড হচ্ছেন। হ্যাঁ, সো লেটস হোল্ড অন ফর আ সেকেন্ড।
Okay, now Niti Aayog, once again, as I said, Niti Aayog replacing Planning Commission in terms of inclusiveness. Acha. Niti Aayog will not give jobs to anybody. Niti Aayog will only design the policies which will help in generating employment growth and the other objectives. Now, see, Planning Commission had also taken out different policies of from since say 1915 onwards till date. So it's not that whatever objectives were placed where everything was attained 100%. That is not possible given our kind of a democratic situation where one party says yes and the other says no, and there are so many other types of opinion in the economy. Again, it depends upon the will of the people and the implementation skill of the government.
Okay. Somebody, let me read the name. Okay, Mr. Shayan Kumar Roy. He wants you to predict the growth trajectory, whether it will be U, V, or W shape it.
Again, present crisis is only so far it is 3 to 4 months, so it is too short a time to comment on this. Like demonetization also took a short term effect. This could also be something like this, provided again, since we don't know how long this period is going to be.
Okay. Professor Dilip Kumar Chatterjee, he's asking, he's talking about the logic behind the appropriation of RBI.
I think there's one before that.
I'll come to that.
There's
Demonetization effect. Yeah, I'll come
okay,
to
so
that.
demonetization effect. See, demonetization mostly hit the medium and small scale enterprises who were not much into the formal credit market. So those who were dealing with cash, they were the ones who were hit maximum. So the formal sector, even if you see the data also, they were not hit much. The agricultural sector was also not hit much because the crops had already been done and they were being marketed to the thing. So it's the medium and small scale enterprises which were hit much, but then we don't have data on these sectors. So I can give you theoretical models on how they were affected, but to say the data and say that yes, they have their business has fallen by this amount, I cannot say right now.
Okay. Professor Dilip Kumar Chatterjee, he's asking about the rationale behind the appropriation of RBI surplus fund by the government and the probable impacts of the recent changes in insurance coverage of bank deposits upon the saving behavior of the people.
Well, the public sector bank and RBI has always served like a funding agency to the government. So whenever the government needed money, they had mostly taken it from the banks if they were not going to print it, because printing money is not always an option, given that it leads to inflation. So what economic logic is, if government has no other option, then what would it do? I think Professor Shaha will be able to elaborate on this because he'll be talking on more on the political side of these things.
Okay.
And there'll be a number of questions. You don't know when we'll not get enough time for Professor Shah.
Exactly. We'll take one question last. It came from our YouTube screening. SBI is saying that Indian economic condition going in a right way and it will be better at post-COVID-19 situation. I don't understand that question. Okay, he's made a statement, Professor S.K. Dash, and I think that is a question. I mean, he just wants an assertion whether the Indian economic condition is in a right way and it will be better after post-COVID scenario, and which economic policy is better before 2000 or after 2000.
The economy has underwent a severe change 1990s onwards, and 2000 hasn't been an exception. So whether to say the policies were better in 1990, I mean before 2000 or after 2000, it's difficult because the situations have changed. So it's like when we studied and when our children are going to study, the situation has changed. So the same policies which applied to us may not be applicable for them. And as for what was the other one, please? What was the second part of the question?
SBI is saying that the economy would recover. I mean, he wants an assertion whether it's right, correct or not after post-COVID. I think you've already answered it.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, it's already answered.
The Indian economy was some sort of a disruption because of demonetization, GST, then monetary confidence lack in different levels. So after this, the COVID came all of a sudden. And this is not something, I mean, easy to handle. Just think about so many people who will go without jobs post this situation, not only in the informal sector, but also in the formal sector. So whether it will be better or worse, it's difficult to say. Very, very difficult.
Okay. Okay. Unfortunately, we are not in a position to take any more questions. So thank you, Relina Madam. Hope you will continue to stay with us for the rest of
Sure.
the webinar.
Of course.
Let's now hear the golden words from Professor Viva Saha. মলয় বাবু একটু প্রফেসর সাহাকে এবার প্রেজেন্টারের রোলটা একটু দিয়ে দিন, শোনা যাচ্ছে আমার কথা?
Yes, sir, you
মলয়
are audible.
বিভা স্যারকে একটু প্রেজেন্টারের রোলটা একটু দিয়ে দিন। হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ, স্যার দেখতে পাচ্ছি না, আবার স্যার বোধহয় ডিসকানেক্টেড হয়ে গেলেন। হ্যাঁ, এবার স্যারকে দেখা যাচ্ছে।
স্যার আছে, আপনি কন্টিনিউ করুন স্যার।
Okay. Thank you, Relina, for an excellent.
Sorry, sir. Sorry. I forgot to introduce you. Extremely sorry for the
No problem.
interruption. Just a small introduction about Professor Saha. Professor Saha is an applied microeconomics. He works in the area of applied microeconomics, particularly in the areas of betting, corruption, privatization, development economics, and mixed oligopoly. He has completed his PhD from Southern California University, and thereafter he had taught at IGIDR. Then he went to East Anglia University, and currently he's working with Durham University. He has some excellent papers in some very well-reputed journals where publication is actually a dream for people like us, like Games and Economic Behavior, Journal of Public Theory, Public Economic Theory, Journal of Comparative Economics, Economic Letters, Economicia, Journal of Economics. So with this small introduction, may I now request Professor Saha to kindly present his talk. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, no, for the kind words, and also special thanks to you and Sukriti, my old friend, for inviting me. Thanks are also due to Relina for an excellent presentation on the policy catalogs of India, particularly over the last 30 years. And also, I would like to thank all the people who have tuned in to this talk. Now, just to link up with Relina's presentation, I'm going to warn you that I will not have that much of rich details. I would rather go back to some of the very basic idea behind policy making. And my objective is to encourage you to think and question as much as you can about policies. Well, just where Relina left, you could see that in India, there has not been any shortage of policies. In fact, in the last 7-8 years after Mr. Modi came, there has been an explosion of policies. Many of them are, of course, changing name from English to Hindi. And these are not, well, by the way, the experts warn us that language, our thoughts are not neutral to language. So these changes have been done definitely with some objective, but nonetheless, as far as the list goes, Mr. Modi has introduced policy probably more than anybody else, all the past prime minister put together. But that's where things are. You also, if you are not an economist or you are not in the habit of reading economics news and things like that, you hear different terminologies like monetary policy, fiscal policy. These are the two broad categories of macroeconomic policies. And then you have been hearing of late supply side policy and demand side policies. So these are not four different policies. Basically, supply and demand side policies are the same policies, macro policies, fiscal or monetary, can be seen from demand or supply, two sides of the market. Anyway, explaining them would take a bit of time, and I'm not going to do that. But let me go straight into some of the fundamental ideas behind policy making. So let me share some of the slides that I have made. You see, policy making essentially is a collective decision, right? Now, by collective, I mean simply going from one to many. Interestingly, as in economics, we see that it's quite complicated when we go from one to many. And the complication comes from aggregation or summarizing. And that's it's not a trivial problem, actually. It's not just that we can simply add. Like if you go to a restaurant, four friends together, at the end of it, whatever you four have eaten, you can add them, and that's your total bill, right? But of course, in decision, in terms of deciding, and in terms of what dish we would like to share, this becomes quite a complicated problem. But nonetheless, in real life, we have been actually dealing with this problem for a long, long time, and we have learned to solve this problem. Well, one institution that does this job for us quite easily is the market. So, for example, today is 14th of August, tomorrow 15th, there would be a huge demand for fish and meat. But so the market needs to know how many people want to have some extra fish or extra amount of meat. And the market is aggregating that. This is a market does it by one mechanism, what we call price mechanism. But unfortunately, there are hundreds of other issues there where there is no market. And this is where things get really complicated. Now, in such cases, what do you do? There are other mechanisms. You can decide by lottery, you can delegate the decision to one individual who can then take the decision. And then we know one mechanism very well, that's voting. Okay? So these areas then becomes very advanced area of study in economics. There are three separate fields, but with some overlap: social choice theory, public choice, political economy. If you are interested in future, you can learn more about it. So here is an example that I'm going to give you. So think of a family, right? This is lockdown time, and a family has 7 members, and they are trying to decide what TV subscription package or internet subscription package they are going to buy. So let's say package 1 has Netflix. Netflix, mostly movies and TV series, etc. It's heavily English dominated, but there are some English movies as well. Now, Netflix is preferred by 3 children of the family. There is a second package which has Netflix, but it also has a sports channel to it. It costs a little bit more, 100. Now, this sports channel is specially favorite to the dad or father of these children. And then there is a third package, which is basically Hindi movies. So no Netflix there. Hindi movies means there won't be much of English movies. This is preferred by mom, grandpa, and grandma. And you can see that the price wise, it is pretty much same as package one. Now, is someone is asking me annotate the shared content. I guess I have to decline it, sorry. A request came. Anyway, so these are the, and the fourth choice, of course, Hindi movie plus sports. Now the question is, how does this family decide, right? You can think of many different ways, as in your family, these things are decided. This is a very simple example. But let's say we choose voting. Let's say package 2 and package 4 are placed on the table for voting, and the family members vote on it. Voting. Then you can see package 2 will get 3 votes from 3 children. Package 4 will get 3 votes too from mom, grandpa, and grandma. Now you need 1 vote to decide. And here comes the dad's vote. So dad, in a way, is indifferent between the two, right? But whichever one he picks is going to be the winner. Now, of course, you can think of many other scenarios, but I won't go into that. So in my story, dad is called the median voter. Median is simply, it's just the middle guy. So in reality, of course, outside our household, we decide in public life through voting, right? We elect a politician, and then the politician decides. Now, in economics, we use something what is called a median voter theorem to decide on policy choice. So what does it mean? Well, in very short terms, it means that there will not be a winner, that is a winning political candidate, without the vote of the median voter. Median, again, as you know, familiar with statistical terms, mean, median, mode, etc. So median is more of the middle guy. If you have 100 people, 51st person is the median person. Right. So it also tells us that the policy chosen through voting will be more of a compromise because it will reflect the preference of the middle guy. So it is more in the middle rather than in the extreme. This theorem in most common cases, but there are some important exceptions. Right. So here is a picture which is the ideal case for median voter theorem. So what I have done, I've drawn a graph. So on the horizontal axis, I am drawn something, let's say, a policy regarding how much money a local government will be spending on police. Now, voters have different ideologies or different line of thinking. Right-wing voters typically are more on the high spending side on spending on police. Left-wing voters are on the lower side on spending on police. Typically, that is the case. Generally, what happens, left-wing voters, left-wing people generally go out to protest a lot and they get beaten up by police. Therefore, they don't like. On the vertical axis, what you have is the number of people or percentage of voters from each of these points. So on each of these points, I have number of people, how many people are there. So 50,000 is in the middle, and both sides are equal. That means 50% of the voter on the left side, 50% of the voters on the right hand side, and most people are concentrated around 50,000. Now, the two politicians comes. One is a rightist politician who says, I will spend 60,000 a month. And another candidate comes, he's a leftist, he says, I will spend 40,000. Since 40 and 60 is equal distance from the middle point, you can see the median voter is indifferent. All the left side voters is going to vote for left candidate, all the right side going to vote for the right candidate. Now the middle guy, the median voter, has to pick which one he is going to choose. And his choice will determine the winner. Of course, I have created this example in an ideal case where the story is somewhat simple, right? But in reality, things are not really that simple. There are many questions that can be asked about this picture, but I will run out of time. So I'll give you a slide. And do not have what is called symmetric distribution of voters. We have a society where more people are on the left side. So this is probably West Bengal in the early 2000s or 1990s. And there you can see these, as the distribution has moved to the left, the median voter's position also has moved to the left. The median voter here is, his preference is to spend 35,000. And we have two candidates on either side. Again, median voter will decide who will be the winner. Likewise, you can do a picture where in a society more people are on the right side, which is probably happening in Bengal nowadays. So median voter is also on the right side, and a policy choice in this kind of environment will have a right bias. Now, I have not quite defined what is right and left, but you basically have a rough idea, and that's good enough for me. Now, the median voter theorem actually does not work in many situations. And these are the problem areas I want to tell you a little bit more about. Well, it will not work if voters are very polarized. So you can see there are two humps on very left and very right side. And that means these voters are ideologically or in terms of their policy choice very polarized. In this case, the median voter actually has a big dilemma: who is going to choose? And how he is going to make his choice will also affect the politicians, what kind of policy they will choose themselves. So this is a bit complicated area, and this is the time and areas we are nowadays getting into. There are other areas. For example, it is a very interesting idea is that if voters think that politicians are corrupt, which can be because of their experience in the past, if the politicians are thought to be corrupt, then there is a left bias created in the society. Why is it? Well, the point is the corrupt right-wing politicians then will try to pretend that they are very honest. That means they would try to be more left-wing than they actually are. Basically, they lie. And then honest politicians have to behave like more leftists than they actually are. So there is a general bias to the left side. And this is also creates then what we call populism. Another point, and this is my own thinking, I do not have any research to back it up, but generally my intuition is that in India, you have a nota option. Nota earlier was not there at the time of voting. And I think this is a very bad option. In India, where you do not have proportional voting, where you do not have what is called runoff, where the majority of the, or rather plurality rule holds on the cast votes, it is Nota actually does more harm than good, because Nota, many of those in a polarized environment, the middle guy goes for Nota, and therefore the politicians have no interest to make compromise and rather choose their extreme positions. And this is very, very harmful for society. But I do not know why, what was the main logic for introducing Nota in India. I know some people love it, and they think they are making a big moral statement by casting a Nota vote, but it's actually, it helps corrupt and politicians. Anyhow, the final point that I gave you an example of a spending on police, but in reality, politicians come with a number of policies. So they will bundle different policies together. So there will be an economic policy, there will be a social policy, there's cultural policy, then all kind of different policies all put together. And this bundling creates an instability in political competition. This we know very well. The median voter theorem, in technical language, it means we move from one dimension policy to a multidimensional policy. And the median voter theorem does not work well. Even the concept of median voter in a multidimensional environment is a complicated idea. In fact, most of the economic problem we see and the complication that comes in the analyzing is the dimensionality. The more dimension we add, it becomes more and more difficult. Anyhow, let's now come to traditional left-right choice, and then we see where we are now. Okay, so traditionally, policy choice, we know that the left parties focus on more redistribution. That is, tax the rich, feed the poor, subsidize the poor. That's more their policy. Most demand side policies has this kind of flavor. And ideologically right parties choose what is called efficiency oriented policies, that is less tax, more incentive for production, etc., etc. This is also often called supply side policies. But generally, both groups in the past, they have stayed within certain constraints set down by set by constitution of the country or norms and practices of that country. And certain fundamental rights are not to be violated. Now, this is, of course, nowadays is gone. So economic policy, as we see countries around the world, Turkey, India, UK currently, US under Trump, these policies are all getting now mixed up, and young economic students are naturally very confused which one to support, which one not to support, which one to think good or bad, right? To give you an example, Trump, a Republican Party, you can see that trade protectionism. Now, free trade has been the hallmark of right-wing governments everywhere for the last 20, 30 years. Now, Trump has been a big vocal advocate of trade protectionism, And yet, at the same time, he wants financial globalization, capital will be mobile all over the world and make as much money as he wants. Now, this is certainly two different things. One is highly liberal, the other one is highly liberal. They are put together. Mr. Modi has added his own things as well. Now there is a campaign to boycott Chinese goods, but FDI from China is welcome. He also happens to be a big crusader of green policies, he has been saying, but then he also wants to sell the forest land for mining and get more coal and so on. So it's all very confusing. Why are they doing it? So this takes us to the idea of populism. Now, populism is there can be many different ways one can define, but in simple terms, we can say it's something like a political paradigm that certainly has a popular element to it, but the key point is uh, it will appeal to a large number of people regardless of cost and benefits. And that's that. Now, ideology is often a big driver of it. And of course, the political language that is used is a very binary sort of common people versus rich or ruling elite. Now, it's we know the Aam Aadmi in India, elsewhere you can say mass working class, they are common people. And then you have a group who are called establishment people, etc., etc. Now, it's not very ironical, rather it is a pattern that in most countries where right-wing populist governments are in place is supported by the rich, but they use the language that appeals to poor people. And this is where you can say the cleverness or beauty of this kind of politics. At the same time, this is a very, very dangerous. You are selling poison by putting a tag as honey. So I'll give you some example. But by the way, I should tell you that populist policies are nothing new. And it is not exclusively is in the domain of the right-wing parties. Take some example, trade restrictions. Traditionally, it has been actually a left policy. But now the right also favor them wherever it suits them. Self-reliance, it's a generally very left and also very right. I mean, some of the RSS people very vigorously campaign for it, and so do many left parties. Restriction on automation, you might be very surprised to know. Well, it's probably more like left, but I'll give you later an example on these. Anti-immigration policies, it's ultra-right. And it's also supported by trade unions in most countries. Then there are a few other discriminatory treatment to domestic citizens versus outsiders. Now, how do we choose between right and left populist policies? Well, there you need to see the objective of the policies, what they are trying to achieve. As you said from the last talk you saw, there are all kind of policies, and they all sound great. Inclusive policies, do this, do that. Every poor man will have a house, will have a bank account, will have a toilet, will have good health, good education. What is left? There is really nothing left. They will be very, their standard of living would be very high. But let's see. How do we judge the objective? So that's where the political dialogue and how they are selling it. And then you have to see their social policies and other legislations to look at it, to judge whether it's a right populist or left populist. I give you some examples. Land reform. It's a left populist policy, no doubt about it. but it's a good one because it's going to change fundamentally the opportunity set of the people, and it's going to reduce long-term economic inequality. Narega, another example, 100 days work. It is left, and it's also supported by center-left people. Why it's a good policy? It is a populist policy, but it's good because it guarantees a minimum standard of living. It is going to reduce poverty. These sort of objectives are uncompromisable. So there are some short-term costs, no doubt about it, but the long-term benefits are enormous. And that's a lot of studies have actually shown how Narega has been beneficial for India. But I'll move on to some little bit more controversial policies. May not be that obvious. Okay. Job reservation for SC and ST. If this was a face-to-face seminar, I would have asked people to raise hands who want this to be abolished. And I'm pretty sure I would have got a majority saying abolish this. Maybe I think has some, they have been toying with this idea to abolish this, and they will get popular support. But in my view, this is a good policy and should be kept. It is unpopular, but it's a progressive policy. It's not a very populist policy, though, but with certain groups of people, certainly they would like this to continue. And overall, for the country and economy, this is a good idea. Privatization, it's a bit complicated. Left parties generally don't support privatization on ideological ground. Right parties do. But now, where do economists stand? Well, you have to go case by case. Unfortunately, there is no general answer. Some privatization, depending on sectors, actually is a good idea. But then uh, uh, there are areas, there's a question you should not privatize. I do not want to give specific examples because that would create, but if there is some question on this, I'll come back to that. And of course, this is a very controversial one, but it has been passed in the parliament, is the national NRC. This is, of course, will get majority support. It is an issue mainly for non-border states. But this is one of the most dangerous and divisive policy that the government has taken. So in terms of objective, broadly speaking, what I just said, the left populism generally operates by appealing to economic groups such as workers, poor, trade unions, etc., largely to benefit these groups. Whereas right populism operates by appealing to ethnicity. They might speak of poor general people, but that's more to get them on board, get their support. But they are stronger appeal usually to ethnicity, religion, gender, caste, nationality, etc. And the objective is to marginalize the weak, the minority, and you make the majority feel good by having a dominance over the rest of the society. And this is what we call the tyranny of majority and creation of a homogenized society, or what is called a vanilla society, based on, you hear the campaign, one nation, one religion, etc. So this is the right populism. Now, we know that the right populism most often takes the form of ultranationalism, and that's where the biggest problem is. It's going to exclude others, the smaller groups. I'm going to give you, I'm near the end of my talk, I'll give you one sample policy question. policy choice from history. Well, look at the first one, nationalization. Okay. Encourage use of labor in place of machines in many industries. Restriction on employers' ability to fire workers, suppress dissent, invest heavily in roadworks, limited trade, and secular or not religious. That looks like a very, very left, very labor-oriented, very pro-poor society with a limited freedom because there is this suppress dissent part there. Now, fill up those blanks. Okay, nationalism, but then also invest heavily in military industries. So it becomes more of a military nationalism. Suppress trade union rise, freeze minimum wage, but at the same time, you encourage use of labor. Suppress all dissents, make it a police state. Restriction on employers' ability to fire workers. I think in the previous slides, I had it, but I did not discuss. Restriction to tell you, many of you probably know that India's labor law does not allow, as of now, employer to fire if their farm size is over 100 workers. This law was introduced by Indira Gandhi, I think around the time of emergency. And that time it was 300 workers and above, mostly for large farms. And then later it was brought down to 100 workers. This has always been, this is part of Industrial Dispute Act 1947. It was introduced there, Chapter 5B, I think, some Section 25 or so, Chapter 5B, etc. Now this law is there in India. Many BJP people earlier had mentioned about abolishing it, but they have not yet, and they do not talk much about it. Leftists are very much in support of this. But now I'll tell you whose policies this was. This was Hitler's policy, 1933 to 38. So Hitler had a policy which pretty much almost like a dream list for any leftist or left progressive party. But when you look at suppress all dissents or the racist part, create a grand German, pure Aryan state, then you know what we are in. So populism can be used for any purposes politicians want. Of course, what happened to Hitler policies? Well, actually, economic policies of Hitler worked. German economy was revived quickly, and it was in a strong position until the war. And of course, then Germany was destroyed. Similar policy also followed by Mussolini's Italy, but fascism depended not so much of nationalization, but they tried to kind of preserve capitalism, which is, in a way, today we call it crony capitalism. Also, both Mussolini and Hitler talked about battle of birth or producing more German or more pure Italian people, which is nowadays you hear from some people, some political party in India saying a similar kind of thing. So what should we look for? Ultimately, we need centrist policies. For democracy to work, you need median voters. You need to stay away from very populist politics. In particular, right populism is never, no, don't go for that. Left populism can be good but it has to be temporary, it has to be strategic, and the objective has to be clear. Land reform is an example, but then pursuing left populism too long damages the economy. And both types of populism, you need to keep in mind, polarizes people. Polarization is not good for a society. So we need to move more to the middle, and what we want to see, a liberal and inclusive democracy, should be more citizens should be more in the middle. That you have to accept rule of law, and you have to look at the health of the economy, and you have to include every section of the society. Therefore, populism is something we need to be very, very wary of, and we need to judge them on its merit. So thank you for listening.
মলয় বাবু, আমাকে শোনা যাচ্ছে?
হ্যাঁ স্যার, শোনা যাচ্ছে। আপনি মোবাইলে আছেন? ওকে।
আমি মোবাইলটা থেকে আসি তো।
হ্যাঁ স্যার,
হ্যাঁ
কন্টিনিউ
মলয় বাবু,
করুন।
শোনা যাচ্ছে আমাকে? So thank you so much, sir. It was such an enlightening lecture. I think it is the first of its kind in the history of the seminars and webinars that we have organized. We haven't heard anything related to political economy, and this was the first of such lectures. So thank you so much. I now declare the floor open for questions. We already have two questions, one from Professor Dilip Kumar Chatterjee. He would like clarification on your remarks that job reservation is a progressive policy. So, sir.
Right. Okay. Why job reservation is a progressive policy? There are certain policies that we impose not for efficiency reason. Of course, we lose efficiency there, but this is done to correct what is called historical injustice. If SCs and STs, which are for hundreds of years have been forced to or denied of any opportunity, and unfairly denied of education and other opportunities, then some protection is needed to help them come up to a level where they can compete with others at on equal footing. And this is where this policy is done. Many countries have it, but everywhere there are criticisms of it. We focus more on the loss side rather than the gain side, and it is something I believe is a progressive policy. Like questions like race, gender, caste, there are all very similar policies to correct historical injustice. Question is how long you want to continue. That's a different question, and then that needs to be looked at in individual cases.
Okay, thank you, sir. The next question we have on the floor is what is the necessity or benefit of popularism? Does popularism is a kind of marketing policy political parties? I think he wants to say, is popularism a kind of a marketing policy for political parties? Professor Jyotirmoy Chakraborty has asked this question. So you
Yeah, okay, Jyotirmoy, what you have said, populism, we are using that populism, not popularism. Populism is picking a popular policy and then try to get most people's support. So let's say I give you an example that I will have two things I'll put together, right? One is I promise everybody a job in the next 3 years. Well, not everybody, let's say who are in the age group of 20 to 25 or 20 to 30, I say 70% of them will get job. And then I also put in this bundle that I will create a Ram temple. Okay. Now, of course, young people, for them jobs are more important than the temple, I hope, and they will obviously go for this. Whereas, and this is regardless of your religion. Whereas older people who go to temple, older Hindus who go to temple more often, care more about those things, will vote for that. That way I have a winner. And ultimately, when it comes to delivering, building a temple is a lot easier than creating jobs. And I can always give excuses. I could not create jobs because the global condition was bad. Because there are corrupt people in the government who are undermining my policy, or I'll find someone to blame it, and these 3 years will be that why populism is now in the past why this was not done, because politicians followed the norm not to bring temple with jobs together in one bundle. But that norm has been broken, and now you can always add a temple in every neighborhood, and you can win election. That is if you appeal to majority in the sense not of income, but in the sense of ethnic or religious identity, you are going to win.
Okay, thank you, sir. The next question we have is that in India, whether we find evidence of polarization between the two largest political parties in terms of their economic policies.
The economic policies in India, actually, if we look at Congress and BJP, the two big national parties, they are not very different. And this is where it is different. India is different from UK or US. I mean, what Mr. Modi has done, in fact, just renamed lots of old Congress policies. In fact, if we recall in 2019, when Rahul Gandhi announced that he is going to give something like 72,000 to every poor man or every poor family, and that was in the framework of universal basic income package. Mr. Modi said he will give 14,000, far less than that. But they are in the same sort of flavor. And then Mr. Modi promised also gas cylinders, health insurance, this and that. So policy-wise, they are not very different. The policies where they are different are in the social policies. And that's where in India, the economy is not doing so well. It's not because the economic policies are bad, but because there are some dangerous social policies, plus some of the reckless policies that Mr. Modi government has taken over the last 5-6 years.
Okay, I think we have time for just 2 more questions. Shubhrangshuda has asked how populism affected nationalism in India compared to Japan, where people believe Japan is more than any state pacifism. I don't think I understand the question, but sir, if you can make any sense, if you'd like to throw some light on it.
Right. Okay. Now, okay, Japan is an interesting example, and well, let me say a few. I do not want to run out of time. Okay, Japan was an isolated from the rest of the world for many centuries. So Japan is ethnically is a still very homogeneous country, And religion-wise, it's not a country of frictions. But Japan had a sense of nationalism, as you said, I think after the Second World War. If you are referring to the policy of MUC, that the Japanese government had selectively supported and promoted some industries, Japanese companies, with a long-term objective for their development. And that policy actually has worked. And Japan's policy has been then copied by South Korea. And China also nowadays is doing something similar, selectively encouraging certain companies or supporting certain companies. Politically, it is seen as a very nationalistic policy. But it still has worked. But now Japan has run out of that dividend. But it has worked because their key emphasis is on innovating something new. You see, that's a very productive activity. If you encourage R&D, and if you encourage your own citizens rather than something good, something will give benefit. Look at in India, in the biotechnology sector, I think Indian government is promoting and supporting quite a few companies. But this is an innovation sector, and it is going to give long-term benefit. But then look at Mr. Ambani. Okay, Modi's. Many people claim that he runs the country. Well, Mr. Ambani's innovation is zero. All he does, takes things from abroad and he sells there. Why do you want to support someone who does not do innovations? So this is the kind of my response to the Japanese story, I would say.
Okay, we have another question from Professor Shayan Kumar Roy. He is asking if you think reservation should be given to those SC/ST people, those people belonging to SC/ST communities, to the first generation. I mean, he's asking what is the rationality if one generation gets a job, then why should the future generations also be given jobs?
Well, okay. So this issue, this question, in another way of putting it, is how long we want to continue. So it's the duration of the protection issue. Okay. Now, the story for India in the SC/ST case is a bit more complex. Well, we need to look at evidence. Do we see a significant number of people of SC/ST origin in most professions? That's number one. I think the various researchers have shown that we don't see. In fact, where there is no controversy, okay, I tell you that you say that the sweeper jobs or toilet cleaners jobs will not be, if you say these jobs are protection have to be observed in sweepers, toilet cleaners, and very menial jobs, there is hardly any controversy. Nobody is opposed to that. But when it comes to admission into engineering colleges or government jobs, there is a huge reaction of this kind. The point is, yes, people who are at the sort of neighborhood of that benefit threshold, they benefit more. That's always the case. And of course, it is also the case, a poor man who is not SC/ST, but somewhat lower caste, like OBC in many states, They would say, I missed it just by one grade, and I do not get that benefit. Yes, this kind of discontinuity is always a problem with any threshold-based policies. Income tax is same logic. So the point I would say, no, there is no good logic. Why father got SC/ST? If the father has become a sweeper, and then the son should not get the benefit of the same protection as a sweeper, I think, would you object to that? Or you are saying if the father has become an SC/ST, got a job at a government department, then his son should not be given. It just doesn't, it's not fair, because you cannot, these are historical injustice. What you are trying to say, that there should be protection in terms of income level. Now that's a different policy. You can have a separate law or separate policy that if someone's income, if the father is now well off, and therefore, and if you say that if income is below certain level, they would be given preference, opposing that. But if you say that because his father got, and if you want to say there are two kind of reservations, one is SC, the other one is the income level, and then you say, if you are above that income level but SC, then you should not get SC reservation. That's fine. That's fine. I think that is not a very difficult. I can see the logic. I can see the logic. Although the operationality is a big problem, we do not have income-based reservation simply because income is easier to hide. That's the problem. So what I said, I know it is a bit controversial, but that's the way it is.
Sir, very briefly, we'll take the last question. Shejuti Ghosh, our student, has asked. I think you have partly answered this question. What connects successful entrepreneurs and populism?
Yeah,
Very
I mean,
briefly,
if I give you an example, like if India has, I do not know Indian government in the past has supported Infosys. They probably did not, but they did perhaps later on. So this is a good thing. If they do for biotechnology now in this search for vaccine, etc., that would be a good thing. I give you an example from China. Oh, another example is India is a global player in sending satellites to the space. And this has become now a commercially very profitable venture for the Indian government. It's not a private company that does it, but these kind of things are very good. I give you Huawei. It's the big controversy going on. Huawei is the leading player in the 5G mobile phone digital technology. Chinese government is fully behind it. And it's a kind of following the policy what Japan once did in 50s and 60s. Now, why this policy, I do not mind this, because Huawei has made huge innovations in the technology area, which other companies did not. So this is where these are not black and white issues. So we have to look at case by case, and we have to say,
case by case.
yes, what is the goal? What are we trying to achieve here?
Okay. Thank you so much, sir. We have an announcement about the feedback form and the certificates. We'll make the announcement, but before that, I would now request Professor and convener of this webinar to kindly deliver his vote of thanks, and then I'll make the final announcement regarding the link and the certificate, and we'll close the session. So Khokonda, Molay Babu, Khokonda ke ekটু participation এর ইয়েটা দিন, রোলটা দিন, participant role.
Good afternoon. It is my privilege. শোনা যাচ্ছে? Hello. It is my privilege to have been asked to propose a vote on the occasion of the webinar. I, on behalf of the MUC Women's College and the Department of Economics, extend very to both the speakers for gracing shall work, sharing us. Professor Saha has a history of association with our college. In fact, longer than our service in this college. We hope you will grace us with your esteemed presence in our future endeavor. We are also grateful to Dr. Burdwan. She is one of the most enthusiastic speakers of our time. We are grateful to her for accepting our invitation. We also hope that webinar is only a beginning of a long bond. We also grateful to our
Kokonda,
Ah,
Kokonda, you are not audible. Kokonda, you are not audible, and the sound is very poor.
He is audible. Yeah.
Okay.
স্যার খোকন স্যারকে শোনাই যাচ্ছে। খোকন স্যার বলুন কিছু।
শোনা যাচ্ছে? Then it's okay.
হ্যাঁ, এবার শোনা যাচ্ছে। একটু
মাইকটাকে একটু মুখের কাছে নিন।
মাইকটা একটু মুখে।
We also
আসলে হেডফোন ইউজ করতে
for his motivation and inspiration that encourages our economic department to arrange various extracurricular activities, the webinar being one of those. We would also thank our beloved HOD, Dr. Hiranya Lahiri, and our respected senior colleagues of this department, Dr. Orpita Banerjee and Dr. S. Bhadra, for their initiative, support, and guidance for encouraging time in this organization, this webinar. We are grateful to our librarian, Dr. Bonali Chakraborty and Dr. Kaji Bonjurali from the Department of Nutrition for their initial help in setting the ball rolling. We would also extend our gratitude to Mr. Taposh Kunsu and his entire team for the technical support. Also, we would like to thank the audience without whom this webinar would not have been successful. Today's webinar has been graced by audience from not only various parts of India, but also from abroad as well. This is certainly a new feather in our hat. Finally, we would like to thank our wonderful students who have turned in such great numbers, not only from our department, rather also from other departments of the institutions. Thank you so much for your cooperation. Once again, we thank all your cordial cooperation. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor Sarkar, for those golden words. Yes, regarding the feedback forms, the links have been posted in the chat box. You may click it, you may fill it, and you will get the certificate in due time. I think we'll take about 1 week maximum, and within that we'll mail you the certificate. In case you still don't get the certificate, please feel free to drop a mail at the email address that we have given in the flyer. I'll repeat: mucwceconomics@gmail.com. mucwceconomics@gmail.com. Please drop a mail in case you don't get the certificate within 1 week, but I think you will get it. There won't be a problem. So once again, from my end, I would like to express my gratitude to Bibha sir and Rilina madam for the wonderful deliberation. And as Kokonda said, we also look forward to have you in our future endeavors. So thank you so much. Thank you, respected audience. With this, I declare the session closed.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. Have a good day. So I end the meeting.
খোকনদা মলয় বাবু এই মিটিংটা এন্ড করে দিন। হ্যাঁ,
Thank you, sir.